This is Conspirinormal.
All right, guys, welcome back to Conspirinormal. It's been a minute, but we are back. We're going to have a couple of people that were presenters at Strange Realities, and one we have is, at the moment, is Mr. Jose Herrera.
Hey, fellas. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, it's always great to have you on.
Welcome back.
We were just having a really great discussion off air, I guess you could say, and we're just going to continue it here. Wren Collier will be joining us hopefully shortly, and we'll get him in here as well. He had some questions that he wanted to ask you too, but back in October when we had the conference, we had you do a presentation about Metawar. And if anybody wants to watch that, I mean, that's still, of course, available on our Strange Realities private Facebook group, which, contact me and we'll work something out. There's all the presentations are up there for Strange Realities 2021. But, Jose, yours was a very interesting one. And you were smart, and you actually did a whole recording, so we lost you. I think your Wi-Fi went out or something, and then I had the recording backed up, so I just went up to the backup, and that was an interesting morning. But
you could tell he's a military man with those contingency plans.
Yeah, exactly. So we're going to talk a little bit about this Metawar concept. We had you on back, was it end of last year, I think? Beginning of this year. Yeah, I think it was towards the end of last year. So I mean, it's been about a year since we've had you on, and I think really what we're going to be looking at tonight is kind of more the concept of Metawar and also mental health and how that fits into the whole thing. So let's start off with just a little bit of background on you for people that may have not have heard that show, since it's been a little bit, and talk about how your wartime experience has helped you look into this concept.
Yeah, sure. Once again, man, thank you for having me on, allowing me to share some of these concepts. Born in San Antonio, Texas, moved to New Mexico 6 years after I was born in '87. I kind of knew there was a period where I was watching the invasion of Iraq take place in McDonald's, and instantly I had an attraction to it. And I knew that I was going to join the military. I was going to be a Marine. November 2006, went to MCRD San Diego, completed boot camp training. Then I went to School of Infantry to become an 0311 Marine Rifleman. And then April of 2007, got sent to my unit, 2nd Battalion 8th Marines. And then 6 months later, I was in Iraq doing operations in a place called Ramadi, Iraq, in Al-Anbar province. I served 4 years and 10 months, completed 3 combat tours, deployed in 2009 for Operation Kanjar, Strike of the Sword. It was a major operation, basically another invasion of Iraq, or Helmand province, taking out Taliban. Came back, deployed again in January of 2011 to a place called Karizi Saidi in Marja district, and basically took out Taliban, or what was left of them. And those are back-to-back combat tours. You see some stuff, you deal with some stuff. They don't really teach you how to deal with the after effects of all that stuff. So it was kind of like a long road to recovery, but essentially I ended up taking a break from operations. I kind of wanted to come back, but I didn't. So in September 27, 2011, I left the Marine Corps, and my body basically just fell apart just from the wear and tear. Wow. And I ended up finding myself at the University of North Carolina. And for 2 years, I was kind of lost until I found myself in the philosophy and religion department. And I had the opportunity to meet George Zervos, who really kind of sealed the deal for me to stay in the department. Then I also had the honor and privilege of meeting Dr. Walsh Pasulka, later becoming her student and kind of becoming her mentee in this odd world of philosophy and religion, new APs, and the whole works. And in 2016, I graduated, wrote my memoir, talking about a series of claims about what was happening within the military as a result of the very politicized environment that the military was undergoing. So a lot of people don't understand that, in small unit leadership type of environments, it's not necessarily that the officers become obsolete. It's just more power is given to lance corporals, low-ranking, members in a squad or in a fire team or in a platoon, and then you run the operations. And when you have ego, when you have poor leadership training, and you have lack of experience. So by the time I was, 22, I was on my third combat tour, and you have some officer coming in, they're kind of like, their mid-20s, late 20s, so I was well endowed with the skill set, knew what we were doing, got very political. People ended up dying. By the time changes were made, it was already too late. But nonetheless, we ended up doing some good work down there. And then shortly right after that, my graduation in 2016, I'm jumping around, but I ended up making a decision of going back into the world of operations. So I kind of went down this mercenary route, started contracting for an organization called Academy, which used to be Blackwater, working with State Department. I was on a Phantom team and a Iron team. So I was doing, I guess, quote unquote, secret missions, taking American diplomats into the red zone, dressing up like the Afghans. And then it got really strange there. Again, Kabul, Afghanistan was very kinetic at the time. It's taken me a very long time to talk about some of the more anomalous experiences that have happened on the battle space. And so in 2018, when I was in Kabul, this voice kept telling me, "Hey, Jose, go home, go home." And I had recognized his voice. It's the same voice, the same kind of like sixth sense type of thing that allowed me to traverse the battle space in between, in between 2007 and 2011. And I listened to it. I came home, and I picked up where I last left off in terms of some of the more critical claims about military service and what was taking place, and how fourth gen warfighting was being transitioned into fifth gen warfighting, what the ethical standards were going to be in terms of how we viewed ethics, in terms of like the Aristotelian virtue ethics system that it was. And then the suicides had been taking place for a very long time in my unit. It was kind of like a dark cloud that had lingered. And in 2019, I kind of went through my own little phase. Basically, the past had caught up to me. When I got out of the Marine Corps, I didn't know anything about a VA. I didn't know anything about any of this stuff. And kind of went down a route where I needed help, but they didn't give me the help that I needed. They told me no. So I basically said, no, I'm not going to come back ever again. And anyway, after microfractures in the brain and dealing with blast and all that other stuff, I ended up getting sent to a VA hospital and getting checked out and all that other stuff. And between there, I kind of got this download, or what they call a download. It was basically a blueprint of what I needed to do in order to stop the suicide epidemic and assist in mental health degradation. And ever since then, I've been working on a blueprint to basically present to the Department of Defense, to the National Institute of Mental Health, of how we can use what I would call, a new mental health paradigm with a wartime adaptation and certain precognitive capabilities in order to deter suicide. But of course, that comes with specific types of safeguards. We have a lot of critical vulnerabilities. I can't remember the website's name, but we have constant cyber attacks. A lot of this stuff can be used against us. I think right now the big trend between like General Spalding and some of his folks that were writing 5G policy, working, to basically outline what was going on in China. And they're basically talking about debt and data traps. So essentially China, in their Belt and Road Initiative, they've promised, all this building stuff. So like in the port of like Sri Lanka, they couldn't pay back loans. So China enveloped them. So now China is using their port for the PLAN, which is the People's Liberation Army Navy. And they're using their fisheries as an extension of the PLAN. So gradually they're enveloping countries, ports, critical infrastructures around the globe in order to establish their hegemony.
Sounds like they learned that from the IMF and the World Bank, maybe.
Yeah. Good book to read is Stealth War. General Spalding basically sat on Trump's National Security Council, wrote 5G policy, but he also had the privilege of going to China, living in China, and going to school there, learning everything about what needed to take place. And eventually he saw kind of the changes that were taking place when President Xi Jinping came into power, and basically, I guess they're mapped to 2049 or 2020, made in China 2025, and then they're going to envelop the world by 2049 or whatever their thing is. And he began to speak out against it. No one else was talking about it, national security. And essentially, after a series of talks, and he ended up getting compromised, he ended up having to step down, and he went about it through a civilian format by becoming an entrepreneur and creating technologies that are EMP resistant and flame or solar flame resistant. And probably it's called the Sempra AI tower. Basically, you're able to communicate with other 5G towers. And it's basically encrypts everything that you're doing in terms of like data. So they can't hack it. And if there is an EMP that ever does take place, your data, your systems are protected. And he's trying to make that, he's basically made it very cost effective for any like civilian entity needing that type of capability. Yeah.
Well, so a lot of this is about adapting defensively to the changing battlefield. And war is rapidly changing into a space that's more on individual and mental level. So the final frontier is really the inner space.
So yeah, one of the claims that I make, and it's kind of controversial, look, this is my opinion. We're in World War III already. That's why I call it Metawar. Okay. The only thing is we're not dropping bombs and shooting bullets and having fielded armies and stuff like that. If it is, it's in a very clandestine type of setting. And even that is traversing a fine line. So it's very difficult. China, their pillar of propaganda, right? They're spending a lot of money and they're hiring a lot of bodies in order to cognitively attack, Western countries in terms of, the mediated state or social media influence. I think this is my belief. China is not going to do some crazy attack. It's not going to send in a hypersonic missile to hit Washington, D.C. or anything like that. Anything like that would basically rally, Western democracies to come together and basically boot Xi Jinping out. And together, Xi Jinping can't handle that type of military superiority. So what he's going to do, and what basically NATO has done, is focused on the cognitive, or what they would call cognitive warfare, not just from a social media or mediated state point of view, but also the new weapon systems that are coming into play, like microwave energy blast being conducted on embassies and intelligence community members. So I don't know if you've kept up with that, but the 2022 Intelligence Authorization Summary basically outlined a series of fundings. A lot of money's going into a lot of anomalous health detection. So they basically told a lot of these people that were being bombarded with microwave energies, whether it was from the Russians or from the Chinese or some other political actor, that, hey, we don't know if you're telling the truth or not. And for a very long time, a lot of these people suffered some serious stuff. And I think one of the CIA paramilitary guys that was in Russia, they got blasted by one of these microwaves. He was saying that, during his sleep, whenever this took place, the microwave energy that hit him was equivalent to him being basically blown up by an IED, but inside the brain. So if you can imagine the concussion and the type of activity from just invisible energy hitting your brain, it's going to do some damage.
This is like the shit of old conspiracy theories, like, targeted individuals and this kind of stuff that, we'd laugh at all these tinfoil hat people, but this stuff is real and employed by these states now.
Yeah, and commercial technologies, technologies are being pumped through and created exponentially that, regulations can't keep up with it. So it's like everything's being commercialized. Like I was having a conversation about I don't know if you've seen the new fireworks drones, like the drones that use lights. All you need is an algorithm in order to hijack that and use that as an attack on a city. And I think Dr. Mossbridge put up an article on LinkedIn talking about how her father wrote an article like, imagine if all the drones in New York City got hijacked and began to hit people. This is the world that we're living in, where these capabilities, and I think I used The Wasp, Eric Frank Russell's book, The Wasp.
Yeah, I was about to ask you about that. I thought that was an excellent analogy. Yeah.
Yeah, everyone's become a wasp. Everyone's become a combatant. And
but give that story though, why that's important. Why you say wasp, but we're not talking about white Anglo-Saxon people. right. White Anglo-Saxon Protestant. Yeah.
No, so in the beginning, they were recruiting members to become this thing called the WASP. And the guy that's interviewing John Mowry basically issues him a series of intel briefs. One of the intel briefs was a prison break where like 4 guys got out of a prison, got 600 miles, got in a car. And while they were in a car, a wasp happens to get in there. And the little wasp, begins to move around, and these guys freak out. And basically, the wasp turns, a big metallic, thing into a heaping scrap of metal, and basically, all 4 members die. And the whole point is that size, capability, all that stuff really doesn't matter. What does matter is the way you're trained and the way you use that training. So essentially, John Mowry is able to take down an entire planet by doing like 9 types of clandestine operations. Some of that being putting memes in specific locations. So he basically creates fields of atmosphere. So imagine if me going into China and basically saying the CCP is not powerful at all, and putting actual little printed out posters everywhere. And it would also create empowerment for some of the people that are anti-CCP. And he ends up escalating it. He ends up kidnapping some people, ends up assassinating some people, hiring some people to do his work. Some of the stuff that's being done right now in terms of the militancy between the alt-right or the extreme right and the extreme left, or the in-between, depending on how you want to view that.
Before we get Wren in here, let's talk about the association with mental health and some of the statistics that you use about mental health, and especially about suicide. I was that was pretty eye-opening when I watched that earlier today from your presentation about some of the stats.
Yeah. So one of the reasons why I got into this type of research and started forming it was because one, it's very, very personal. My unit talks about it, but very vaguely. So in my unit, I think there's been like 52 suicides. This is an infantry unit. The Biden-Harris administration has just recently released a summary of what they're going to promise veterans specifically. And they basically said that the veteran suicides that were recorded from 2010 to this point has exceeded the amount of combat deaths in Vietnam, Iraq, and Afghanistan. So a total of 65,000 veteran suicides have taken place since 2010. Okay, so it's a problem. One of the other claims that I have, and these are actual statistics, but they also released recently that now instead of 51.5 million people having AMI, which is any mental illness, it's 52 million. And these are just the ones that are recorded, okay? So the National Institute of Mental Health has put out publications indicating that there are 52 million people in the United States that suffer from any mental illness. And that's ranging from anything from, schizophrenia all the way to depression, anxiety. in the way that the technology has enmeshed with our economy, and the way that we use everything as an information hub, and the way the technology has been used to keep us addicted or on these smart devices, is contributing to mental health degradation. And as a result of great power competition, political actors and nation states wanting to undermine U.S. influence, they can't use kinetics. Why? Because it's kind of become taboo, and it also undermines a lot of their efforts that are being done on the global front. So, for example, I talked about China's Belt and Road Initiative. If they begin bombing the United States or taking out smaller countries in terms of kinetics, that's not going to look good on their part. So they want to do it very, very subtly, right? So they take a lot of Sun Tzuian principles and they apply them to a lot of their capabilities. So the claim that I'm making is, if I really wanted to cause cause maximum damage, my target audience would be that 52 million people that have AMI. Why? Neurochemically, they're already compromised. They lack resources to seek the proper therapies. COVID has really isolated us. So the ability to go outside and have certain types of experiential therapies and modalities like hiking, right, are being taken away as a result of either one, fear, or as a result of like local regulations and stuff. So it creates the perfect conditions to use weaponized content, right? So what's the weaponized content, right? Well, we can look at simple socio-political stuff, right? So if I want to create a meme, right, that basically focuses on, how the left or whatever the right is doing something, I'm going to create certain visuals. I'm going to put certain words on it. There's an algorithm, right? All that stuff is going to get propagated. It's going to persist. It's going to have some type of impact. And the people that are addicted, that are isolated, are going to continuously read this stuff, and their little HPA axis is going to get activated, and whatever pre-existing issues they already have is going to get even worse. And so what you have is a contagion, right? So not only just you have like COVID-19 propagating and passing on, you also have the mental health contagion, right? So in 1994, the CDC did a series of studies basically saying that memetics can be applied to suicide, meaning that suicide is contagious. So they noticed that every time there is a suicide that's a high profile, the way that they report it has to be a certain way. Why? Because there's going to be other increases in suicide. And so they found that through other series of studies, the way that they report this and the way that it's being done can have a mass effect. So let's say I wanted to target a population that's already predisposed to this. Let's say the veteran population, right? One, there already is a pre-existing issue that they're already deemed ill as a result of supposed wartime experiences or just that lifestyle. They're going to use culturally sensitive issues like the fall of Afghanistan. Then they're going to create mock Facebook pages, Instagram pages. They're going to fill it up with the most vile stuff that you could imagine. They're going to propagate it. They're going to go after people. And there's an interesting part where humans have begun now to decipher the difference between a bot and a human being. And so they're using humans now to make it more organic, make it more real. And they're using mock veteran or mock chartered veteran organizations in order to get that actually passed on.
You showed some of that in the presentation too, like a lot of those memes, and I can honestly remember seeing those. Just like, it said something like Desert Storm Veterans. It ended up being a Russian site. If you go and look at Facebook got wise, you go and look at the admins, it's like from different countries. So all that kind of stuff that you showed was very, very interesting and very revealing. I'm just something I found interesting in that statistics about suicide. It's around about 45,000, seems like, per year. Seems like it kind of sticks that way. However, in 2020, there was actually a little bit of a drop in suicide. And I can remember when COVID first started, people were saying, well, people are going to be committing suicide left and right because of the depression and everything. But actually, it seemed like it trended a little bit more downward in 2020. So I kind of wonder what the factor is with that. Yeah.
I think people were relaxed. I was like, no school? Great. No work? Great. And I'm getting paid. I can go file for unemployment. Yeah. So those early days were good to go. But then you get a national tragedy like George Floyd take place and get exploited. And then it all goes to shit.
Right.
So I think that's where the dip took place. A lot of Americans needed a break. And I'm not too sure what the statistic now, but I know it was like a few years ago where it was like Americans are working longer, harder than ever before in American history. I think the average hourly wage that someone needs in order to basically find rent or have rent is like $18 an hour, and the majority of Americans,
Yeah, I'd say here in Nashville, it's more than that at this point. But also one thing I wanted to point out, the school board meetings. I mean, people were laughing about a lot of the kind of like nutty people that were showing up, but honestly, it's really not. It's really serious, because it's what you're really saying is that what these other nations are doing is basically using our own mentally ill people against us as a weapon.
Yeah. Cambridge Analytica was doing it. They did it in 2020 and they got caught doing it. They were targeting the mentally ill in religious areas like churches. And they were basically weaponizing them for alt-right stuff. And that's the other part. You don't know who out there is. So this is what so some of the consultant work that I do, I break off with this because we typically find ourselves in this conversation. I say, look, how much of what is propagating, online and face-to-face was actually artificially created by, let's say, the Internet Research Agency or the WUMAU? How much of that is created by a troll, propagated by a troll? The meme that you're talking about or the context that you're talking about, how much of that was artificially created? Now we have to look at the analytics. What are you talking about? Was white supremacy always this big of an issue? I don't think so. But then again, I'm Mexican and I can traverse that line, because what are they going to do? They're going to attack me for, what are they going to attack me for? You know what I'm saying? I'm providing the DoD publications, the analytics coming from the best of the best. And we're not putting two into two. And a lot of folks, they're slapping around this word, psychological operations, it's a psyop, but people don't actually know what's in a psyop and what it actually does to the brain chemistry or what it does to entire groups. And we need to identify that. We need to talk about that, what it's doing to us.
Yeah, because you're saying we're thinking of these things as mental, but they actually are having physical implications.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they modify behavior, but the deeper issue is those modified behaviors lead to epigenetic changes.
Suicide being the absolute extreme.
Yeah. Or you becoming a bad actor yourself and doing harm unto others. And again, that's how many of those people were weaponized.
Either way, it's killing Americans.
Yeah. Or the more the end goal that I say is just make the United States just this chaotic environment where foreign policy or geopolitical issues essentially don't get talked about, to the point where, and this is kind of what's happened with the fall of Afghanistan. We can't promise stability in some of these more tumultuous regions. And China and Russia are banking on that.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think about 2 months ago, they finally announced that we're going to go ahead and bring a subsidiary company or a company of the Taiwan microchip processing company here to the United States, because China is going after Taiwan. They need Taiwan in order to fulfill their vision. And so, China's not going to attack right away. There's even talks now that, Taiwan has the ability to deter an attack from China. But again, what can the United States promise? We've been at war for the past 20 years. We spent $8 trillion. Look at the damage that we've caused from those wars. Can we promise another country a legitimate force? No, I don't think we can. And we're still going through, some of the more recent transitions. A lot of folks don't realize that whenever you bring in a new weapon system or a new flying, or a new helicopter or something like that, it takes like 24 months to train up an entire group. Like, it's long, hard hours. And now they're it's crazy. The Marine Corps Times just published how they're going to begin to hire civilians to come in as ranked enlisted personnel because they can't find the people with the capable skill sets to conduct these types of operations. So they're not even going to have to go through boot camp anymore. They're just going to be hired on as civilians, but under, the guises of a gunnery sergeant, and then fill in the ranks where they need to, because that's how far behind we are.
And this is all in this, your Metawar paradigm is all in the backdrop of a changing world order and what essentially was declared in 2018, which is that we are now in a multipolar world. I actually was studying international relations in the first decade of the millennium, and there was still the big question was, whether we're going to have a continuation of the unipolar world with America as a hegemon versus is there going to be a return to a multipolar world? And that's like way over now. Like, it is a multipolar world already, and that's being acknowledged at the highest levels.
Yeah. I mean, especially like we were mentioning with Taiwan. Taiwan shouldn't trust that America is going to step in if China does anything. Just like how we stood by and let Russia take Crimea. We're not like, what teeth does NATO even have anymore? I don't think any country in the world could rely on America to be an ally. And I think that, just this week, I think we're seeing troop buildup on the Russian-Ukrainian border again. And I think it's because like America doesn't have any teeth anymore, and other countries know this, right? So they're like, I think as long, you mentioned like unipolar world thing, I think as long as the petrodollar is still the reserve currency of the world, like American hegemony is relatively safe. At least it's harder to wrest away. But it, remains to be seen if the dollar is going to remain the global reserve currency. So once that starts to fall apart, I think that's when you'll really see these other countries take the reins.
Yeah, all bets are off after that.
Yeah, I say we got about a 10 to 20 year opportunity to fix all that. But going back to that Russia thing, I think that's reflexive control theory. They did that. So they basically did 18 months of shaping, decisive shaping, and the actual operation was 2 weeks. So I was just listening to Ukrainian soldiers on, I think, on the front line. I can't remember specifically where, but they were fighting pro-Russian separatists. So the battle is actually going on right now.
Yeah, it's already kind of started. I just listened to something this morning on the War Nerds podcast, so Gary Brecher and Mark Ames, and it was like a good sort of summary of like current events if people are curious.
Is this still concentrated on like the Donbass region, I think it's called, that old industrial part?
Yeah.
I think so. I mean, if I'm not mistaken, fighting never really ended there, right? Like it's kind of been like low-level conflict
7
for
years.
Yeah.
Since 2014.
They're just going to peck at it.
Building up again.
Peck at it. We'll never go full skill because then we'll have to respond.
And of course, we're not supporting the best irregular armies there, to say the least. Either.
Yeah, because there are a lot of Nazis, basically.
Yeah.
It's like,
that's true too. Hosea, just as an aside, I'm curious as a Afghan war vet, how you felt about us pulling out of there and how it went, and just, I mean, that's got to be something that is feeding into the mental health of your fellow vets.
Yeah, that was one of the A lot of guys feel so. Look, I look at it this way: militarily, we accomplished everything that they tasked us out to do. We never failed. Like we, close with destroy the enemy by fire and maneuver to repel the enemy's assault. Slay bodies. That's what we were there to do, right? Then they give us these other side missions to accomplish as well. We did those as well. I think one of the last missions was to stand up a school. So one of my last missions as a Marine Rifleman was protecting children to go to school. And I did that. I don't know if they're alive or not. I'm sure the Taliban killed them because that stuff isn't, one of those things. But militarily, we accomplished everything that we needed to do. Diplomatically, I think we failed. And I can say that because I was on the ground in Kabul doing this type of work, seeing how these diplomats talk and stuff like that, and how they deal with some of this money, that there were some red flags to be raised. And, again, gray zone challenges are very, very unique. There's no actual doctrine. So I do feel that diplomatically, we could have done something different. I think it was already too late. Now, I think maybe it's more of an ego thing, like I didn't lose a war. You know what I'm saying? I'm still here. Like we got body count. I'm still fighting the fight. Like, you know what I'm saying? So maybe that's the ego thing that's kicking everyone's butt. But how much of that being propagated is, trolls, bad actors, so forth and so forth, right? Trying to mobilize a group of individuals that are tactically and strategically sound to move against the government or another soft target, right? So, yeah, it does feed into it. A lot of guys are upset about it. All I can do is listen. But, yeah, strategically it was a failure. We lost Bagram, which was crucial to protecting Taiwan. And not only that, we gave up basically $3 trillion to the CCP. Now they control the flow of natural resources that are needed to create specific technologies that we use every day. Conspiracy-wise, we just gave them a $3 trillion check to back out. You know what I'm saying?
Can you elaborate on that concept of gray zone?
Yeah, so it's just gray zones are very old. They've been used before. They were used during Kennedy's time. So gray zones are basically a mixture of political, economic, lawfare, types of activities that are used against the United States. So for example, whenever China was creating their artificial islands, right, they were dredging and they were building up all this stuff. And now they're using their fisheries as an extension of the PLAN, so they're getting closer to Japanese islands. They're going way beyond their fishing points, traversing, getting over certain maritime borders. They're basically obfuscating. They're using certain techniques where they'll push up to the point where they're about to attack, but they won't attack, which puts us on edge, because then we have our OODA loop, right? Our ability to make a decision whether we should attack them or not becomes that much harder because we don't know if they're going to follow through, right? So let's say, for example, they just like take for example, like the fisheries, for example, right? Those fisheries, we know that they're using them for an extension of the PLAN. They get close to our, ships. Do we have the authority to blast them? How do we know that they're actual fisheries? How do we know that they're actual PLAN? We don't. And that makes it that much harder. And, if we were to get too lax and allow their boats, their fishing boats, to get close enough to us to attack us, then it'd be perfect for them, right? So that's something that we're always on edge. And that's just one aspect of it. And again, gray zones challenges are always unique. It's actually one of the downfalls of the United States. And I gave the example that the white paper where US SOCOM basically analyzed the 100 years of warfare Out of those 57 instances, I think 43 of those were gray zone challenges. Basically, we never resolved the issue. We just basically contained it somewhat and then walked away from it. And again, these are destabilizing the regions. These are allowing other vectors to fill in a vacuum where we then can't step in, where we have to begin to analyze again. The social media thing is one of those gray zone challenges, right? How do you handle that, right? We have physical weapon systems and borders and doctrine to stop physical attacks from coming to the United States. But then again, when it comes to our data, we basically give any bad actor bitstream data, right? We give them our location, we give them our IP addresses, we give them pictures of us, and they do whatever they want with it. And again, how do you respond to that? Do you limit? Do you change? Do you censor? What do you do? Do you build firewalls? Right? How do you begin to assess those situations? And this is a problem with a democracy, because on one end, when you begin to present the solutions that are necessary in order to do something about it, one side is going to see something else as tyrannical, and another side is going to see that as, this is exactly what we need. Kind of like the COVID-19 shot, right? There's a lot of issues with that. And how do you, again, raise on challenges? I could read you the definition, but it's just a mixture of all these warfares put into one.
And I think people would have the most popular conception is probably like the idea that people have of the Cold War, not the using proxies in other countries necessarily, but like we were in a conflict and everything that happened was part of a conflict, even though there was an open kinetic warfare.
Yeah. Or it was proxies being used, like in the Korean War.
Yeah.
Let's let Wren get in here. Wren, I know you had some questions and some things that you wanted to ask Jose. And
yeah, so I mean, I thought your presentation was really fascinating, Jose. And like one thing though, I wanted to ask you about what your opinion on, like, you seem really focused on like foreign actors using like these memetic warfare methods to try to influence things that happen domestically here in the States. And that makes sense, right? Because like social media provides like a perfect propaganda attack surface for anybody, right? Like you have a captive audience, you have applications that are effectively Skinner boxes that like give you hits of dopamine when people like and retweet like whatever you post. Like they're designed with like addictive, like casino type like user loops in order to keep people using them. So they provide the perfect delivery method for psychological operations. But one thing I thought was really interesting and some research I've been getting into recently was the prevalence of intelligence actors, like domestic intelligence actors in early internet forum culture, like specifically like Something Awful, 4chan in like the early years. There are some good threads about this by Crypto Cuttlefish on Twitter that I've read through. But the basic idea being that a lot of like early internet troll culture was built in order to test if you could convince a group of people who were shielded by anonymity to harass and attack specific targets, to the point of maybe causing them to commit suicide or just like basically carry it. Like, can you crowdsource your sort of soldiers, right, from just anonymous internet users? And I think it's really interesting when you factor in that people like Michael Aquino used to get into arguments with people like on Usenet and like early, internet message boards and stuff. And, he was Army PsyOps guy who worked in the Phoenix program. And I'm just curious how you feel about like, are these programs also being used by our own country against its population in order to pacify, control, or influence how we think and act?
Yeah, we have a long history. Look at the COINTELPROs of the like early 60s, 70s. They used those to essentially take out the Black Panther Party and the Brown Berets and so forth and so forth. Yeah, absolutely. They've been using it for a very long time. Again, you can't just shoot somebody in the head because it's going to cause a lot of problems. So it's easier and a lot, I think, well, you might consider it humane to modify someone's behavior through second or third effects, right? And so influencing a friend to influence that friend, right? And Major Prosser wrote about this in his 2008 paper, which was used by Dr. Finkelstein in the military memetics program that was funded by DARPA. But yeah, they use it all the time. Why wouldn't you? I mean,
yeah. Are you guys like, I've been reading Program to Kill lately. Have any of you guys read Program to Kill?
Yep. Yeah, we both read it.
Yeah. I feel like I'm late to the game on this book, but it's been very eye-opening to the extent that, like, learning about how I think it's really key, like, how this all seems to derive from, like, Phoenix program stuff. Like, how do you get the domestic forces of a country? In most cases, like in Vietnam, we used their domestic police and civilian populations to carry out this basically like terrorism program in order to pacify and dismantle the Viet Cong. And you look at the early, like you sort of look at the post-Vietnam situation in America where you had the New Left and the Black Panthers, you had a lot of social upheaval. And you see a concerted effort on a lot of fronts, I think, to use new media systems to control populations. Like, this was blowing my mind recently when I was researching this, but that you look at a lot of the people who were involved in the early establishment of like PBS, and they're all like either intelligence guys themselves or have like ties to intelligence. And there's like white papers by the Rand Corporation, by some of the guys who like found like Children's Television Workshop, who are talking about the potential to use cable television and public broadcasting as a way to pacify the ghetto dwellers, like quote unquote ghetto dwellers. And it's really chilling because you're realizing that like that was just one aspect of it, right? And you look at the, like you brought up the whole George Floyd thing, the militarization of police, and like especially during the Obama presidency, bringing in, giving police departments huge grants, military weapons and vehicles, military training. And that like stinks to me of like domestic Phoenix program type stuff, because you're using this sort of domestic organization to terrorize its own population, either into submission or, whatever. And, the whole Program to Kill thesis is that like serial killers, were used. For people who are listening who aren't familiar, that serial killers were created basically as a way to terrorize people and sort of push them into the arms of the reactionary right-wing conservative, side of things, with like the satanic panic and stuff.
Kind of like the Unabomber too.
Yeah, very similar idea. But a lot of this stuff is like manufactured, and it, like lately, I get very very paranoid, conspiratorial brained lately.
No, not you, Wren.
No, I know. Reading Program to Kill before going to bed every night has not been, I would say, healthy, but I'm getting through it. But
it's interesting, but I do think rest in peace. I think McGowan. He takes some liberties in that and in some of his other stuff, but he has some very interesting, unique perspectives on a lot of different stuff.
Especially focusing on like Henry Lee Lucas, which is kind of iffy because Henry Lee Lucas was a notorious liar.
Yeah, but then there's stuff that he said that like matches up with unrelated stuff, like the Matamoros Mexico cult, right?
Yeah.
It's like, I don't know. It's like, how much was he lying and how much was he just stretching the truth a little bit? And but what I was going to mention, in my more paranoid moments lately, I've been wondering how, like, if you look at a lot of recent mass shootings or, guys who just drive into a crowd of protesters or whatever, these like random acts of terror, once you start looking at them a little closer, and like they seem to be a little less random, I think, than they're being given credit for. Like a lot of times these people seem to be cultivated by the FBI or the CIA, or they're sort of pushed into doing it by these organizations. That's been the long-standing rumor with the Boston bombing, right? Like where did the Tsarnaev brothers learn to make the bomb? because they didn't know how to do that. Somebody taught them how to do that or gave them the bombs. So who did that? That's never been really answered. And is it a case where...
Well, it's not that hard to make bombs.
Yeah, but it seems like in all of these cases, the guy who's teaching how... Like if we put a note of warning to any Conspirinormal listener who has a guy contacting them on the internet to try to teach them how to build a bomb, they're probably an FBI agent. Like, it seems like in all of these cases, the person who's giving these instructions to these people are like FBI or something. And
yeah, I will say this. I know somebody who was one of the architects for the Great Meme War. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And this individual was contacted by authorities in order to go after actual white supremacists.
Mm-hmm.
But white supremacists weren't the issue at the time. It was left-wing extremism. Mm-hmm. And when presented with both cases and analytics from going into these places, it was denied. And they just wanted specifically white supremacist analytics and mentions.
Mm-hmm.
Why?
Well, I think like a lot of those groups are heavily infiltrated, right? Like you look at the group of guys who was like plotting to kidnap the governor of Michigan. Like there were more FBI agents in those Facebook groups than there were actual like people involved in the conspiracy to kidnap her. And it really seems like in some cases, these people are either pushed or goaded into doing something. And I'm not saying they're still responsible for their own actions, right? I'm not trying to say that they were entrapped or whatever, but just that I think in some cases, it's almost like creating the problem so you can swoop in and then like stop it at the last second and say, oh, we protected the Michigan governor from being kidnapped, right? But would they have ever plotted to do it in the first place if they didn't have this guy helping them plan it who was an FBI agent? It's like, are they creating the problem? And I sort of wonder if, like, we know this was occurring with like early internet forums and troll culture, right? So that's like sort of the Metawarfare aspect of this. But does it extend to these sort of acts of random violence that we've been seeing in the country over the last 10 years, right? Is that also like sort of a domestic Phoenix program?
I think what Jose is kind of talking about is that this information environment is kind of evolving into something that you don't have to target people individually and have like operations by different actors like you used to.
You could mass manipulate and let it happen.
Well, yeah, that like this environment's being created that these people are going to naturally be led to these extreme states of all kinds. And then that's not traceable, so it's even better for whoever's trying to influence that behavior.
Yeah, you just, like I said, it's like a shotgun blast, right? With buckshot. Create the weaponized content, blast, 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 blast. Who gets addicted, who gets triggered, who wants to mobilize. The optimization and the algorithms allows you to go ahead and get those groups, go into those groups, right? Mm-hmm. Then you're going to seek out more knowledge, right? So a lot of it is done on our own, right? We do it to ourselves. Like the Sinai Arab brothers, for example, Russian intelligence gave the FBI the heads up. And what do they do? They respond with sending a couple of law enforcement officers to go knock on the door with no follow-up.
Yeah. And was that because they already knew who they were? That's my theory. At least, well, they already knew who they were.
But again, look at early 9/11, right? Mm-hmm. There was no interagency cooperation. So what did they have to do after 9/11 happened? They had to make interoperable decisions in order to go ahead and share information. Mm-hmm. How much of that was human error, right? And there's a lot of weird things that have taken place, between those two contexts. But personally, I don't think they have the manpower in order to sift through literal exabytes of information. Mm-hmm. I don't care how sophisticated your heartbeat or X key score is. There's just too much information propagating unless you have, some quantum computer working, that is able to do all that for you and connect those dots. I don't think, and again, maybe, I haven't reached the highest levels of government where I've talked to people, but I have met people who do this type of work, who do go after nation states and cause them to lose billions, lose a lot of money. So is it being done? Yeah, absolutely, 100%. Whether it's no, go ahead.
I was going to say that's like what you mentioned about sort of. Okay, so the cyber element of this, like I'm in information security, so like I see sort of some of this close up, but I think the really scary thing is the false sense of security that both like the US approach to cybersecurity and like the domestic corporate approach to cybersecurity gives people. Just from like personal experience, there's a lot of very bad practices and a lot of standards are not followed in like corporate cybersecurity. And I know this extends to like federal cybersecurity too, because I used to work in that sector. And like, if anybody ever wants to dox me, literally all of the information from my clearance paperwork was a part of the OPM breach. So I'm sure it all exists on some Russian darknet forum somewhere. So seeing all that happen and then seeing a lot of the recent conversation about like encryption backdoors and stuff really, really worries me. Because it's like, not only do we have an insecure like cybersecurity posture pretty much across the board throughout all sectors of industry, the idea that we're then going to introduce backdoors to what little encryption we do have seems suicidal to me. I don't know if you have any cybersecurity thoughts or not.
Well, like you take the Colonial Pipeline issue, right? That was a disgruntled worker that happened to have the passwords and keys, and he passed it on to the guys, and they were able to do all that damage. And you know what I'm saying? So again, what steps are companies and conglomerates taking in order to ensure a good mental health in an organization?
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So are you going to treat your workers like garbage? I mean, again, how many people have life skills? How many of people are going through school, taking these courses in order to better themselves, in order to survive or be resilient individuals? Not many. A lot of folks don't have that. So again, that's human error there, right? Because profit is what I want. I own you. I pay you. You work for me. Right. So that's one level of it. I do know recently that the FBI got hacked. Right. So a bunch of male enhancement pills, spam got flooded and got sent to a bunch of people. So the FBI was sending a bunch of male enhancement pill spams to people. But that's all they could do. Why? Because their internal like hardware structure is in a physical structure. You would literally have to break into it in order to hack all the real stuff.
Yeah, all the real stuff's located in SCIFs, or what's called a SCIF. So
yeah. So I mean,
there's no access to those from the outside or from the internet.
So I call again, this is about creating institutional entropy, right? We want to create as much disorganization as possible, so that the real operation takes place and we don't even have an idea that it's actually taking place. So all the stuff that we're talking about is a mirage. Okay. The real operation is, already shaped. It's already taking place. And then the post-operation effect is going to be a more docile and more disorganized society as a result of, again, epigenetic warfare.
And just like in cybersecurity, which that world really comes from, like the hacker culture, and the social element and social engineering is like the outer layer of all that. So if you have disgruntled people, it's still like the social, and if you can have an impact on that, it affects all the cybersecurity stuff too.
Yeah, I mean, I can say straight up that like your biggest attack surface is your personnel, right? It's not how good your firewalls are or your whatever endpoint protection you have. It's literally almost all breaches are insider caused, right? They're either somebody got phished, or somebody accidentally gave information to somebody, which I guess that'd be phishing, but you know what I mean? Like all of these hacks usually originate with either user error or users being socially manipulated or socially targeted. Socially engineered was the word I'm looking for. But that was one thing I found interesting, Jose, and some of those memes that you were sharing. And you were mentioning how a lot of these organizations or groups are, it's not all bots, right? Like a lot of people have this misconception that it's all like chat bots or whatever. But in reality, it is usually like a human being creating these memes and putting them out. And one thing I thought was fascinating, I think it was the meme that was like, it had something like you said, like today's Memorial Day in case you thought it was National Barbecue Day or something.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I just kept looking at that and I'm like, there's something off about like the grammar or like the syntax. It's like, it's not like totally messed up English, right? It's like perfectly normal English, but there's just something slightly off about it that makes it look like it wasn't created by like a native speaker. And I thought that was like looking at a bunch of those, you start to see that. And I was like, oh yeah, I can actually tell in a lot of these, like just the phrasing's like a little off. Like
that wouldn't be like your usual semi-literate meme creator. It's different than that too.
And it's nothing anyone would say in an actual conversation.
Yeah, exactly. But it's like, it's close enough that I think that most people would catch it, right? Or really know what to look for. It's almost like it's almost perfect. But there's just something weird. It's like a really good CG or something. You know, the uncanny valley effect you get.
Yeah.
Still tell it's not human. It's like you can look at this and be like, I don't think an American made this. Like,
but I mean, it's coming from your perspective where, you know, you're someone who's been inoculated to ideas of misinformation and myth building and outright lies and propaganda. And
a lot of people are just reading this stuff and they're just eating it up, or they're not thinking more than just a couple seconds about it. And I thought that was an interesting part of your presentation too, with the idea of like entropy, like how big the meme is, or like even in bite size, right? Like how quickly is it observed and then forgotten about, right? Because you're moving it into that liminal part of memory where it can go to work on the brain.
Yeah, that's I was sharing with Adam and Sergio. That's kind of like one of the next things that I'm doing right now for a presentation next that I'm going to be sharing some of this information is how the actual equations from this weaponized content actually targets the neurochemistry in your brain, identity and role, and then what potential impacts can be had. And sifting through Dr. Finkelstein's work, there's a portion in his military memetics presentation where they basically write that there is, at this point in time, there is nothing in their arsenal that they have that can counter or stop modified behavior impacts. So if I wanted to target audience and do some damage, there's nothing that I can do to counter it. So for example, the Frances Haugen thing, there was they were basically saying that she was a psyop. She was working for the government in order to censor Americans. And I think I recently tweeted that it doesn't matter what you think, whether she was a psyop or not. She is and isn't all at once. And you can't get rid of that. Right? You can't get rid of that atmosphere that's going to tether to your affective state. So whatever side you're leaning on, it's still going to exist. And so that's what that content does to you. And again, these are multi-generational issues. Like, for example, I live out here, or I live in New Hanover County, but I work in Pender County. Here's the demographics of Pender County. The average person makes maybe $20,000 to $24,000 a year annually. That's nothing. I think you have maybe like 20% of the population that has a bachelor's degree. You have high rates of suicide. You have high rates of substance use. It's all agriculture based, right? So these issues do lead to how one is able to cultivate, actualize, right? Reach Maslow's hierarchy, right? So these people, not all of them, and I don't mean to generalize them, but there's a large majority of them that are down for Trump. And a lot of this stuff that the parents are saying, gets put into those kids' heads, and then I have to hear it on the other end that the DNC is a bunch of satanic pedophiles that are this cabal of trying to undermine, Donald Trump. These are 12-year-old kids that for 4 years were bombarded with this. So we're cultivating the perfect storm for the next, however many elections this issue is going to persist with. And I actually wrote a science fiction story about it called Codename Q, about how this generation of students essentially grows up with this memeplex and begins to write and create revisionistic histories, which is a huge issue that we're seeing right now. And I think that's the problem with the metaverse, is that, one thing that revisionistic games and readings and stuff like that do is it limits your ability to immerse yourself. But once you put on that fucking VR headset, man, it's over. And that's why I'm working with a psychologist right now in order to make this stuff a little bit more concrete and evidence-based, in part because we don't have the administration to test for this stuff. Who here is going to work and talking about narrative warfare, memetic warfare, or how weaponized content is basically, making everyone a combatant, and what it's doing to gene expression and how it's going to become heritable? No one is. Not even national security. And it pisses me off, but at some point we have to connect those two dots, because that's the only thing that's going to save us.
Yeah, that's an interesting aspect that you brought up. I've never even thought about that, the alienated, populations of Rust Belt America weren't necessarily the targets of this propaganda, that it was their children that were the real targets, right? Like their captive audiences, basically.
Yeah. And, traditional psyops, right? If you want to go after a perfect target audience, it's going to be the youth bulges. But right now, Russia, China, and the United States are facing a huge issue with population. Fertility rates all over the world are decreasing. People aren't having kids. I think the estimated trajectory where the youngest age group is going to be in Africa. So we're facing a more of an elderly population. So what's that going to do, right? One, economically, we're not going to be able to survive if we have a completely mentally incapacitated youth bulge. They're not going to be able to procreate. They're not going to be able to actualize and have a sustained life. And if you have an elderly population, then how can they, take care of kids, right? Or if all these people are fighting for jobs, it just becomes a lot more, it has more entropic effects as we move forward. So that's like that's why universities are targeted. Yeah. And this is a project that I was working with the university, where a veteran student got doxxed by another student who wrote on his writing piece that he was racist. And the guy had a TBI and PTSD, and he wasn't racist or anything like that. He wrote an absurdist piece. It was meant to be incongruent and whatnot. She totally took it to a whole other level. So I contacted the department chair, and I let him know what's going to happen, what could happen. And basically, after, multiple hours of conversation, I was gaffed off. And so I wrote a 10-page letter to the provost talking about everything that we've talked about, but a little bit more intimate in terms of like the analytics, which led to another conversation. But basically I told the department, look, what if that individual would have retaliated against the university or the department? You would have been liable. What if that individual would have committed suicide? You would have been liable. Why? Because your department is propagating a bunch of pathogenic narratives that are not conducive to the environment of the institution. And not only that, these kids don't have the experience to make life decisions like that. How can you, how is a 19-year-old white female going to tell another, 25-year-old white male who's been around the world, seen some things, that he's a racist? How do you make that definitive, choice? Right. And of course, you might be wondering, well, what did he write? It was just a stereotype of bar talk, and it wasn't even nothing. And why am I defending him? I'm not defending him. I'm defending the idea that if we begin to dox people who have mental issues without understanding the context, then we're going to weaponize a bunch of people. And that's what's happening.
And the extremes lead to other extremes.
Yeah, that's a really good point. But like you said, most people don't understand these concepts. So I mean, and people just they really just see things as black and white. I mean, they see things as like in a melodramatic kind of way, good versus evil, and it's just so much more complicated than that.
Yeah, and I'm not saying like I think that like the last books that I read regarding socioeconomic statuses in the United States was Jeffrey Winter's book Oligarchy, and I'm not saying that inequality isn't an issue, that poverty isn't an issue, that crime isn't an issue. I'm not saying that law enforcement is or isn't an issue, right? There's more context that goes behind those specific types of things that are exacerbating these other issues. So I understand what some of these groups are actually fighting for. I understand what some of the other more conservative groups are saying. But in between there, they're not realizing what great power competition means, which is World War III, Metawar, whatever you want to call it.
And this environment is discouraging actual dialogue between those people to find both answers, ways forward, and things in common.
Well, yeah, I think that's on purpose.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's key too. I've heard, this is just anecdotal stuff, but that a lot of wealthy people don't allow their children to use social media like whatsoever.
Right, that's true.
Yeah, definitely the heads of those tech companies don't.
Yeah.
And I like that should be your hint that there's something poisonous in there that they don't want their children exposed to.
Yeah, it's too good for them, but the proles will let them use it, right?
Well, I want you to touch on some of the ways that you think we need to move forward. A big part of your research is thinking about ways to overcome this stuff, ways to inoculate people against this memetic warfare and things that are destroying our societies, and your emphasis on mental health. So, you're not one of these people who just like point out all the problems. You've got solutions, and you work with people. You got boots on the ground helping people to overcome this stuff. So you want to talk about some of your prescriptions for these problems?
Yeah, sure. Peer support, right? Life experience, holistic stuff like going out in nature, right? Mindfulness, yoga, anything that's physical activity, drinking 8 glasses of water a day, getting your daily exercise, getting 10 minutes of sunlight in your body, having conversations with friends, telling someone you love them, smile a little bit more, try to override your own heuristics. That's like the simple stuff, basic day-to-day stuff that you should be doing. And if you're not doing that, it's a little bit more difficult to do that because of the environment or whatever regulations. Zoom is a good way. And that's something that me and my buddy do all the time, not only just on the podcast, doing narrative identity theory type mental health, but, I get on our little Facebook group that we have and we chop it up, and there's no filters. We are who we are. And I don't hide it. I don't like hiding. This is who I really am. But the more grander stuff that we need to do and that I've been trying to get across is that we need to add wartime adaptations. And what does wartime adaptations means, right? That means having a proper education of the geopolitical landscape in the way that it's being written within national security, within the national defense strategy, and then the national security policies. It's just crazy to me to think that as a CEO or as, a psychologist or anybody in a leadership position would think that they're immune to what China, to what Russia, to what domestic actors are doing, that they're immune to that. And they're not. I say all the time, I recently said that the concentric zones in human ecology are corrupt. Every time someone goes into therapy, they have to come back into the same toxic environments. And that toxic environment, guess what? It's smart device based. You don't even need a heroin hit in order, for you to relapse. All you need is that dopaminergic hit, and then you're done. So, that's one aspect of it. The other aspect of it is creating sweeping reforms, right? What kinds of reforms do we need? It should be mandatory that any of these social media platforms should be giving out actual classes on what this stuff does to your brain. The same way we do with cigarettes and any other type of substance. Secondly, we need to have actual mental health operations teams, and military language, military operations is in my head, so that's how I see things. Maybe we can call it something else, but let's call it what it is. You need to actually have people that, a psychologist, a therapist, a peer support specialist, someone who's trained, a social worker, to go into communities and start working with communities to understand the actual cultural narrative, the dialogue, and the memeplexes that have been established in those communities. Do the proper reports, whatever that looks like, and then begin to dissect that by implementing the mindfulness pieces, the yoga pieces, the holistic therapies, the EMDRs, the nature walks, the community walks, whatever it is. It's about creating community where these types of things can't compete with the atmosphere or the weaponized content. And that's the other part, is that I'm privileged to work with a group of individuals who have worked in these types of capacities. And, the advent of a 24/7 news cycle, for example, you're competing with information that is far more sophisticated than a simple meme like stop, drop, and roll. Okay. So how do you leverage that? And how do you leverage that and remain an informed citizen without going bonkers? And again, that goes back to how are we going to implement resilience training? And what is resilience training? Well, resilience training is understanding how, adverse childhood affects complex PTSD or complex trauma affects the human body over time. So what a lot of people don't understand is, for example, I was having this conversation earlier today about post-traumatic stress, right? So it's not like some secret, that I have, post-traumatic stress from some of the situations that I've been in. But on top of the way that I grew up as well, right? The adverse childhood effects of growing up in a very impoverished community, seeing some of the things that my father did and participated in, understanding that we were very, very unfortunate during times of period made me be a certain specific way, are all compounded together. So my body is remembering the trauma of the past. And how do I begin to fix that? Well, you need a neural map of your brain. And how do you create that neural map? You have to jot it down. So I go through a process. I have my own therapy model that I do with guys that are going through peer support. And we basically make a neural map of all the big points in their life. And we tackle it on and we replace it with another stimulus in order to compete with that meme. Because whenever you're going through day-to-day life with all these compounded traumas and you're seeing all this weaponized content, what's actually triggering you? Is it the trauma from the past, or is it this stuff? And so again, it gets very, very, very difficult. So you have to understand not just ACEs, or as they call it, PACEs, which stands for protective compensatory adverse childhood effects. They're basically the positive aspects of this stuff, because the negative side effects of ACEs can be reversed. With like daily exercise, good relationships, good eating, good nutrition, stuff like that. So understanding that aspect of it, along with the transition into great power competition, goes a very, very long way. And then there's another aspect to it as well, and something that I've been working on, and I'll begin to talk about a little bit. I don't know the nuts and bolts of precognition. I really don't. There's other people who do it better than I do, but it works. The military used programs all the time. They never really called it, what it actually was, but you were able actually to use this stuff. And I've anecdotally gathered evidence from across the board, everything from people in special operations all the way to the regular infantry, where people knew, they had that sixth sense where so-and-so was about to kill themselves. And a day later, 3 days later, 2 weeks later, they commit suicide. We have to teach people how to properly read biofeedback, look at that, have the safeguards of encryption so that it's not being used, use forecasting, right? So if I have a dream or I have a intuition or precognition about something happening to so-and-so, then I need to act on that. And then you need to have the actual resources in order to act on that. So what does that look like? That's creating, again, mental health operations teams. What if you can't get to somebody, right? And there's a special program that I'm trying to create right now that can incorporate all of that. And again, you know, the nuts and bolts of precognition. What does that look like? Well, experiencing precognition in the battle space, what I can say is that it very much traverses the monastic traditions, right? So I was a specific weight size. I had a specific amount of sunlight that I was getting. I had a specific ritual and practice. I was specifically indoctrinated with certain types of things. And I was, you know, there's all these mechanisms that monks and like people Diana talks about in her book, American Cosmic, that exhibited these types of monastic traditions that were able to do these magnificent things like biolocation and have out-of-body experiences and whatnot. The same thing applies, right? And I think Dave Metcalf calls it soft sci, right? So we're able to map DAOs and use intuition in order to track and locate caches and whatnot. The same thing can be done with mental health, but it can be done a little bit more sophisticated. And that's why I want to test with biofeedback, or at least what I call bioalgorithms, understanding how to read, you know, the psychophysiological effects of what's happening in the body in order for you to see it on the screen and be that much more connected. And I call that being precog compatible. We can become precognitively compatible with other people by syncing with other people. And I think how that happens is through biofeedback. So the reason why some of the guys operated so well, like Joe, who was killed in action, we operated on a spectrum that was unreal. We were very, very successful in the battle space, in part because we were connected. I didn't need to anticipate. I just knew everything just flowed. And he also exhibited certain types of precognitive abilities. We just didn't talk about it like that back then. We just knew. We called it, yeah, this is just good trading. But it really wasn't. It was something more. And then why the suicides are taking place, this kind of gets a little bit funkier, but I think there's something else going on besides just what I talked about in terms of being a memetics framework, or what we would call a contagion. I think that we're all tethered, right? So I think Pierre Teilhard de Chardin had it right when he was talking about the noosphere being this encirclement of human thought. And I think that the internet is a corrupted form of the noosphere. I think the true noosphere is precognition. And I think what's happening in terms of mental health degradation and suicide is what I call precognitive tether disseverment, or noospheric tether disseverment. And I'll give you this example. So when Joe died, he was killed in an ID, and he died in an awful way. And I had to go and pick him up and then put him on a helo. And as he was flying off, I was staring at the helicopter, and it felt like something went out of my body, and I couldn't explain what it was. For a very long time, I actually thought I lost my soul. And then through a series of downloads and reading, I figured out that that's what it was. It was a precognitive tether disseverment. I lost my precog compatible tether. And as a result of it, I kind of went haywire. And so I think what could have mitigated the effects of that very traumatic experience would be resyncing with someone else, right? Automatically putting on some type of technology that would allow you to sync up with somebody else to see their biofeedback. And obviously we didn't have the skill sets back then to, be resilient or mindfulness or anything like that. You know, all I wanted to do was kill. So I think that working on those types of things here in the near future, and again, this is why I'm working with a specific team in order to go after these more difficult concepts. Once we have that, I think we'll be able to really stop what's taking place globally in terms of suicide and the whole mental health issue. But in terms of practicality, I can't go to DOD and be like, yeah. Precognitive compatibility and precognitive tether disseverment is, no, they want to see like the hard facts. And again,
I was going to say, are you familiar with the Trojan Warrior program?
No, I'm not. I've never heard of that.
So the DoD might not think you're crazy at all. Like Bob Mayer wrote two books on this, like Psychic Warrior and something else. But Psychic Warrior was the really popular one. But
That's Dave Morehouse.
In the 90s. In the 90s, he was part of a program where they took all of these like SEALs and Special Forces guys and tried to train them in like RV, in precognition, and in biofeedback. They were like teaching them different like techniques of Buddhist monks, like breathing techniques, yoga, and this sort of thing, kind of to do exactly what you're talking about. So that type of program at least existed for a certain period of time. I think it was discontinued, but yeah, that's like, I don't know. I don't think the stuff you were saying there is outrageous at all.
Well, we've kind of been immersed into that world view. Some of those folks might not be.
Yeah.
In fact, this is one of the issues that we're facing right now. So again, I have several meetings that I'm going to be, attending, where I have to present information, and I was trying to gather information from a special operations group, whether they're doing specific types of programs still in the Marine Corps, and turned out that they're not. So what does that mean? It means that we're no longer focusing on reading the human terrain. And when you're no longer focused on reading the human terrain, the precognitive capacities still exist, just not, again, it's not as finely tuned. And I'll give you an example. So I'm not operational anymore in the sense where I'm conducting real world operations. I'm not protecting people anymore. I'm not getting in gunfights. And so my rituals have kind of lessened, but they're still very, very high standard. I pack on a few pounds. I weigh 250, but I also do a lot of heavy lifting. And I douse a lot of caffeine because I don't want that activated anymore. Mm-hmm. But guess where it manifests? And it manifests in other areas, and that's in science fiction writing. I'm able to forecast certain events in my science fiction. And that's kind of what I've been doing right now. And 2 years ago, when I began forecasting certain events, those events are now shaping here today. And I forecasted them. Never would have thought, that, I mean, not never would have thought, but more so it's just like, okay, there's something to that. And so I got to follow through with that if it's forecasted that way. And so I think that their abilities are going to manifest in a different type of way. And I think because everything's shifting more toward like this idea of fifth generation warfighting, where everything's becoming a lot more technological, the sense making abilities are probably going to come through using technologies within the battle space, right? Not anticipating, but forecasting where potential swarms could come from, where potential A2D2 systems are, incoming missiles, so forth and so forth. So I'll give you an example. Right when General Soleimani was killed, that night I went to bed and I had this dream that an Iraq base was going to get blown up. And sure enough, 3 days later, one of the bases in Iraq gets missiled, and like 15 dudes end up getting like some serious head wounds. Right now, they're working on a capacity called future intelligence, where they're trying to operationalize this stuff again. And so
the problem with operationalizing that, though, I know this, like I got Army CRV training and some other stuff, and I've done a lot of research, and especially into the way the Soviets were using RV. Like they were using remote viewers like on the front lines in like Serbia and stuff, doing like battlefield operations. And the hard problem here is that there's not a clear answer about whether it's precognition or it is like retrocausality. Like in the instance that, this base is bombed, if it hadn't been bombed, would you have had that precognition, right? Like it's almost like it has to happen for you to, in the future, for you to have that precognition in the past, because that information has to be passed from your future self to yourself in the past. I think that's why it's so important in like RV protocol, like strict, Army CRV protocol, that feedback is always provided to the viewers after they've turned in their viewing report. So they're always shown like what their target was and then graded on it and stuff. But the question that brings up is, are they really determining information about the target, or are they getting information from their future selves, basically? So in the instance of like you were talking about this bond you shared with your fellow soldier, and I think that same like psychic bond exists between people who have like very strong romantic relationships, like mother and child, any kind of strong relationship between two people in like a physical space that is forged in like highly emotionally charged experiences, I think creates that entanglement. And what I'm worried about in like our increasingly, like you brought up the metaverse, right? Like this increasingly digital existence, where we don't have physical proximity and physical connections with people like we used to, or as many people. Do you worry that the ability to utilize this like very natural human capability is going to start to deteriorate? And maybe that's the point too of alienating people, like they're being alienated.
Oh no. So that's what epigenetic war is. This is the end all. So what's happening with narrative warfare, memetic warfare, meta war is incapacitating the ability to use the executive decision-making process. This is what I say to normal people when I'm talking about my research. When it's with you, we're talking about incapacitating the precognitive abilities of individuals. So yeah, sure. I don't know the nuts and bolts of retrocausality or what's taking place, but I'm getting information from my future self or whatnot. But what I do know is that, like in the science fiction writing, that super forecasting stuff, there's multiple characters and players. Am I reading their minds as well? You know, how is that working out? I know that that's an ability that's manifested now that I'm not operational anymore. And I'm not, well, I wouldn't say that I'm not necessarily tethered to somebody. I'll keep that, silent, but in this case, I'm not, so again, the ability does work in that way. But again, if you're targeting 52 million people that have the potential to procreate and you incapacitate their epigenetics, their offspring isn't going to have that ability, and it becomes diluted because the anxiety and the depression overrun, or the mental illness overruns that ability. And so this is what's at stake. This is what I mean by epigenetic warfare. And this is why, I subtly talk about it online, the whole precognitive thing. What's actually getting murdered here or killed here is your precognition, your ability to see whatever potential forecasts might take place.
You know what that makes me think of, Sergio? In Ingo Swann's Penetration, where he talks about the these alien extraterrestrial bioandroids and how like they're sent here to assassinate psychic humans because only psychic humans can like identify them. So I'm not, just to be clear, I'm not saying that's going on.
But it is getting really weird. We're talking about actors using these information systems and artificial technology, but it is hard not to see this also as something darker going on, which Jose said, is there, in this process of the machines learning, how to manipulate us, is there something else going on too? And is that potentially opening up something? This is all wildly speculative, of course, but the powers that be in the world, think they have these things under their control now. Might this turn into something that they no longer have control over?
Well, that's the portion. I don't know if you've seen like my Metawar framework. That's a small version of it, but there's a portion called metahumans. There's already humans that exist that can wreak havoc by using these abilities. Maybe they don't have the lexicon that we have. That's what they're using. In fact, I think about all the gunfights and wartime experiences that I've had, and I think how many of the Taliban had this ability as well? Because they were, they were good at what they did, but how many of them have that same ability? And so who else out there has that ability to wreak havoc, on the world's elite military fighting force, right? So it's like, yeah, it's
Going back to some of the stuff you're talking about, though, like it almost sounds like you're proposing almost like what the Civilian Conservation Corps was for healing and mental health for our country. Something like that could be amazing. I mean,
It's something that is
I mean, I know me personally, it was hard for me to find mental health resources just because of how expensive they can be for people who don't have insurance or don't have healthcare, right? It can be extremely difficult for people to get the help that they need. So yeah, having some sort of organization that could provide that to communities on an organized basis, free of cost or whatever, would be amazing.
And that's one of the meetings that I'm having on Monday. I sit on the board of an organization called Peer Recovery Resources. And the individual that runs it is a Vietnam veteran. His name is Johnny Puckett. He's one of the only vendors in Wilmington, North Carolina that actually certifies individuals in peer support. And I'm trying to bring them into the 21st century. They're a little old, but their heart's in the right place. And, mental health is their number one issue. And again, I implement I'm a WHAM facilitator. So WHAM is just whole health action management, basically talking about all the things that are bad for your body and good for your body and what you can do in order to maintain, homeostasis or equilibrium and be a functioning human being. And I put in some of the adaptations that I talk about. Why? Because most of your time is spent on a computer or a smart device. And guys, here's the kicker. We're still transitioning into 5G. And, there's other technologies and other studies being done. I might slaughter it, but Mark Bacuzzi's work with the Woodbridge Institution, the data sets as vectors for intention. It's funny, my son ended up drawing a series of like colorful art. And then after, he did it, I asked him like, what does that mean? And he said, it means motivation. And it's funny because it's like purple and blue. And the way he designed it looked like Mark Bocuzzi's visualizing art as intention study. So it was like, wow, so this means motivation to you. This is what you're seeing in terms of motivation. Well, if you get a data set that you can inject into a smart base city to evoke an emotional response, to activate the HPA axis, then you no longer need an IO. You just need an anonymity from a person or an AI to constantly pump in that data set. And I wrote a science piece called Psycholooping, where basically the data set ends up getting found, Russia ends up getting a hold of it, and then just bombarding specifically mentally incapacitated people or mentally ill people in order to see specific types of things. And they end up doing, some serious damage. So it's there. It's right around the corner.
And the first line of defense is our mental health.
Yeah, what you're doing in order to... and look, this is what I say. If you have an emotional response towards some type of information, you need to question that. Because it could lead you down a dark path. Those triggers are serious stuff, man. And I know trigger has become a kind of a crappy word these days because everyone's using it. Oh, you're triggered, but it's a real thing. It's a real thing.
Absolutely.
This has been an excellent discussion, gentlemen. I want to continue this on the Patreon side if you guys are cool with that. I think we got a few more questions that we want to ask, but we can do that from the Patreon if you guys are cool with sticking around another like 20-30 minutes. Wren, before we say goodbye to Jose, tell everybody where they can find you. If nobody knows Wren by now, I don't know where you've been, but
you can find me at liminalroom.com or various podcasts. I also run a Discord server for people who are interested in the occult and magic called Lunar Cry, and there's some links on my website at liminalroom.com if people want to join that.
All right, and Jose, please tell everybody where they can find you and the resources that you have available online, all that good stuff.
Yeah, you can find me on Facebook under my author page, Jose Leguena Herrera, or Leguena Herrera. It's kind of a long name. Or you can find me on Instagram as Leguena 28. I also have my own website, is Jose Herrera 03xx.org. There's an email page where you can contact me. And you can also find me on Twitter at JosieV28.
And you have an organization that you work with veterans as well, right?
Yeah. So I do peer support. If anyone is in dire need of any kind of crisis intervention, I can step in. Sometimes I put my phone on 24/7, so sometimes I'm on call. If not, we can schedule something, talk about things specifically. If you're looking towards like certifications, whatnot, there's several programs that run across the United States. I can also pass on that information as well.
Well, excellent, guys. And of course, everybody can find us, conspirinormal.com and all that good stuff. Serfiel can tell you where we're going to do a little bit of a Patreon episode with these guys. And Serfiel can tell you where to find that.
Yeah, you guys can check that out at patreon.com/conspirinormal. We've got a multi-tiered system there. For $5 a month, you get a new exclusive episode for Patreons every week. In addition to that, we have our monthly hangouts. Those are going to be transitioning into Strange Realities, mini Strange Realities branded speaker engagement every month. And for $10 and up, you get to join the Mystic Crew and get a free ticket to that. But the rest of the public will be allowed to come as well for a small fee. $20 and up, you get an exclusive t-shirt, and we've got a whole lot of them. So you guys check us out at patreon.com/conspirinormal.
All right, guys. Coming up next week, we're going to be rounding out the year with our usual episode with Dr. Future. So join us next time on
Conspirinormal.
If you would like to help the show, please consider becoming a Patreon at www.patreon.com/conspirinormal or leave a one-time donation at conspirinormal.com. And please check out our YouTube channel, Conspirinormal Podcast.